that you or me, Dougie?
I can do it, Wes.
You got it.
Sounds good.
I think it says it's recording.
Good to go?
Yes.
Yep. Let's do it.
All right. Alabama. Arkansas.
Brett Leach.
Illinois. Doug McClain. Indiana.
Adam Phelps.
Iowa.
Warren Jones.
Kentucky.
John Brunges.
Louisiana.
Jason Olzak.
Manitoba.
Jillian St. George.
Michigan. Minnesota. Mississippi. Missouri.
Rachel Van Osdell.
Ohio.
Mike Irvin.
Ontario. Saskatchewan. Tennessee.
Jamie Fedderson.
Wisconsin.
Taylor Finger.
Canadian Wildlife Service. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Dave Scott.
Bird Banding Laboratory. USDA APHIS Wildlife Services.
Lee Humber.
USGS. All set, Orr.
All right. Thank you very much, Doug. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin general introduction.
Somebody said, fucking I'm paying over top of this. Oh, boy.
Hey, Pam. All right, so let's jump in with general introductions then. So we got Pam Derrickson, the Fish and Wildlife Service. Anybody else want to introduce themselves?
Illinois has Sam Klimas on today. So those who haven't met Sam will get a chance at next month's meeting. But Sam is Dan Holmes' replacement.
Thanks, Doug. Welcome, Sam.
Hey, all, this is Drew Fowler with the Louisiana Co-op Unit.
Hey, Drew.
Brad Cohen with Tennessee Tech.
Hey, Brad. Thanks for joining.
Amy Shipley, Wisconsin DNR.
Hey, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Paul Link, LDWF.
Hey, Paul.
Wes Little still hanging on from Kentucky.
Good man. Thanks, Wes.
And Kentucky also has two of my technicians, one that's going to go band with Paul in a few weeks, I guess, Jillian Murphy and Gracie Arnold.
Hi, Todd.
Welcome. Anybody else?
Looks like Frank just joined.
Oh, hey, Frank.
Yeah, hey all, sorry I'm late.
No worries. Thanks for joining us. Okay, looks like we have Derek Ballard, DU. And then before we begin, I would just like to formally welcome Jillian St. George as the new tech rep from Manitoba. Manitoba is a critical partner, so we're excited to have a tech rep in that position. Welcome, Jillian. We look forward to working with you in the future.
That's nice to meet all of you.
Okay. Anybody else? Looks like we might have Seth now.
Hey, Seth Max is here.
Great, we got Seth. All right.
Houston Haven's here. Sorry.
Hey, Houston. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, let's jump right in and begin with our first agenda item, an update from Dave Scott with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Take it away, Dave.
No problem. I'll try to keep it short because I know you have a full agenda and JB forgot to take me off. For our summer meeting, I should have a revised example of the data book that I showed you guys a couple of months ago. So I've seen an early example. Hope to have that for something for y'all to review. Just a reminder, the status reports are not supposed to be released before the 20th, which is the Tuesday of our meeting. So I'm hoping we're either early or it doesn't disrupt the flow of our general meeting and my update, but just a reminder. Todd Sanders reminded the Flyway reps that the policy memo is that approach to doing our regulations on an annual basis. It's moving forward slowly. We haven't got to the point where we have anything for you to review, but I'll keep you posted. But so far, at least, it's not dead in the water. Last week of June, Ken had a staff meeting with the Division of Migratory Bird Management folks at Patuxent. So we were in there for a couple of days preparing for the AHM task force and trying to provide some guidance from the division and talk about those issues. So I think if things go well, the kickoff meeting to that task force will probably be at AFWA. And the final Federal Register document for the coming season and the season selection document are both drafted and sort of in the process somewhere. I'm hoping they get published in August, and I will give you an update when I see those things. Other than that, working with Taylor a little bit on Sandhill Crane interest among a legislative study committee in Wisconsin. And I'll take any questions you guys might have, or I'll just let you get back on with your agenda.
Questions for Dave? Dave, when you mentioned AFWA, the AFWA meeting, is that in September of this year?
It's about the third week of September, I believe.
Okay.
I believe they're meeting in Madison.
Do you think there will be anything further needed from our Flyway before that meeting?
Probably not. You have representatives. And so I think anything that needs to be communicated for planning that meeting will go directly to those individuals. There may be some conversation with Harvest Management Working Group folks, that policy committee. So Adam and JB may hear a little bit, but other than that, I don't expect a lot.
Okay. Any other questions for Dave? All right. Thank you very much, Dave. Look forward to seeing you in August.
Yep. I got my travel approved for that, by the way.
Nice.
So early on the game.
Okay. Agenda item was number 3, Dr. Levretsky, but he was maybe going to be a little late. Is Phil on yet?
I'm here. Just got on.
Great. Great. Are you ready, Phil?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You want me to start it?
Sure. Let me give it just a brief introduction. So we last heard from Phil in October 22, and he talked to us about game farm mallard genetics. Recently, Mike Brazier reached out to talk about the duck DNA project a little bit that he's collaborating with Phil on. And so Phil's going to give us some background and overview of waterfowl genetics and how they can affect management. And then we're going to hear specifically about duck DNA from Mike at our in-person meeting in August. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Phil.
All right, thanks. Share that. Put this over here.
Looks
Make
good on
sure.
my end.
All right, looks good. You can hear me, see me, all that good stuff.
Yep.
All right, well, first I want to thank Oren John inviting me over, just giving you a bit of background and what we're doing here and what hopefully by the end of this little talk, everybody can start thinking about how genetics can help you out as well. So the title of my talk, Expanding Toolkits for Waterfowl Conservation in the 21st Century. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Texas, El Paso, where I run a wildlife genetics lab. And our primary focus or question that we like to answer for state, federal, private individuals is, what are you working with? Right. So understanding exactly what you're actually working with, how they compare to other things that you thought were the same or may not be the same. Are they locally adapted, single species studies, multi-species studies? How are they genetically connected? Is there connectivity issues that management needs to deal with? You know, how do you move sheep or elk or from one mountain to another, and how many individuals would that require to facilitate, you know, good amounts of genetic or gene flow, so that way we don't have issues of inbreeding and so forth. And so these are the types of kinds of questions we answer at a management scale. We obviously look at it in evolutionary scales as well. Just really using the data to its fullest potential. Of course, I've applied this to the Mallard complex, as you'll be hearing it throughout this talk. But in general, my lab has teamed up with a whole sorts of folks, again, other universities, state, federal, private individuals, to work on a plethora of taxa and questions and so forth. So my methods are more or less applicable to generally everything that's got DNA and a bit of funding. But my lab doesn't just do genetics by itself. We also are out there catching birds, putting units on there, looking at habitat. We're applying new molecular methods to look at diet, as well as species richness in an environment without necessarily having to do 100 cores. And so some of these are the things that we're trying to develop new methods for folks to use out in the field. Obviously, genetics is our bread and butter. How do we do this? We do basically everything under the sun, depending on the question and the type of data that is required, from single gene PCR to partial genome sequencing to full genome sequencing. We've done all of it. We've published on all of it. And so one of the things that we've sort of, moved the field forward is moving away from microsatellites. Many of you probably know what those are and have worked with other scientists. They take time to develop. Oftentimes they are not as reliable from one lab to another. And so we've moved forward with what is called DD-RAD methods. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but more or less my method, as you've seen the taxonomic breadth, works across all organisms more or less. And you get thousands of markers all across the chromosome, all across the genome, really great representation, and particularly great to look at population structure, gene flow, understanding those types of events at a very fine scale, finer scale than we've ever been able to do in the past. One of the primary questions that I'm always, being asked, and I ask myself, is how much hybridization or gene flow is occurring, and if it is it a problem? Is it human mediated? Is it evolutionary based? We always thought hybridization was uncommon amongst wildlife, and including ourselves. But, as more of folks like me study these types of events, we start to see that, in fact, hybridization amongst lineages is quite common, including between humans and our previous ancestors, Denisovians, as well as Neanderthals. Here's the part where I want to make sure everybody understands the difference between hybridization and gene flow and what that means on the landscape or for management purposes. Hybridization would be something like this. You have a mallard, a black duck. They make this what we consider an F1 hybrid. If that F1 hybrid is a mule, meaning that it can't survive and or breed, then this is simply lost breeding potential. You should have had a clutch of mallards and you should have had a clutch of black ducks, but you actually have this dead end clutch that doesn't service either of the species. Gene flow is essentially hybridization, but what is required is that vessel, that first generation hybrid, to be able to backcross, meaning that it is viable to some extent, maybe not as well as the parents, but it's viable enough that it's able to survive and breed to a certain extent. And this is where genes start to move between species. This has a long-term generational effect. It's not just an acute effect where we've lost the potential of that clutch today and to the future, but obviously as they move on and as those genes spread, that might be breaking down complex, important adapted complexes that tell species when when to migrate, where to eat, how to feed, and so forth and so on, making the species more and more maladaptive through time. And the consequences of hybridization, there's lots of different situations that might arise, and my team constantly studies what is the opportunities that hybridization has in ancient times, so evolutionary terms, as well as we're moving into the Anthropocene and more species come into contact. One of the study systems that we work is the Hawaiian duck. I'll touch on that a little bit, where they've actually we've published on, we continue to showcase that the Hawaiian duck, which is an endangered species, is actually a young hybrid species between a wild mallard and what was once pronounced throughout the Hawaiian Islands, the Laysan duck. In New Zealand, it seems that this hybridization between feral mallards and endemic gray ducks has resulted in this feral mallard population that themselves are hybrids, and that they're actually doing better, equal or better than the endemic species themselves, which is known as heterosis. Here in North America, what we're finding is that the same situation between feral mallards or game farm mallards and hybridizing with wild mallards is actually resulting in negative effects, such as outbreeding depression, where you're starting to see populations that have negative influences from those situations. And then I'm also going to use these situations and talk a bit about genetic rescue, which is how do we artificially move the needle back to where we were, and the question obviously is, can we? So if you don't know the mallard complex, this is the primary system that my group works on. The mallard is holarctically distributed. It's the only one that is so. The rest of them are endemic to a certain island or geographical location on continents. Here in North America, we have Mexican duck, mottled duck, American black duck, obviously the mallard, and then off on the Polynesian or Hawaiian side, we've got the Hawaiian duck and Laysan duck. Of course, many of you have watched or maybe have watched some of my talks, and obviously these days I talk about the wild system, but also the domestic system. Again, if you don't know this, the wild mallard is effectively the wolf of all of these various park duck things. Right, so if you've gone around, everybody knows the Pekin duck. If you've gone to dinner somewhere and you ate duck, you probably ate that or something of a derivative of it. And the one that we're more interested in these days is known as the game farm mallard. It is it's a domestic breed, just like you would call a lab or a husky or anything like that. But it was, I will say, developed specifically for game shooting and game purposes. As you can see here, people and ducks have been intertwined for eons, ever since we could basically hunt them and eat them. We know that Neanderthals ate them. We know that early humans here in North America ate them. They were one of the last successful domestication events, being the mallard itself in China by the Ming Dynasty. And obviously, more currently, they are the beacon of wildlife conservation through the Migratory Bird Treaty Act or adaptive harvest management, or all these sorts of all these sorts of things that are sort of beacons in wildlife management. So the conservation concern really is with this game farm mallard. So looking at history, I'm not going to go through it all because of time, but in general, you could see that these birds have been basically moved around everywhere Europeans and then ourselves have moved, and they've been supplemented or introduced in these various locations, and everywhere they've been introduced, there are hybrids. So, right, so the way you can read this is a genetic ancestry of a bunch of individuals. The closer the balls are in the principal component analysis, the more similar they are genetically. The further they are, the more dissimilar, and anything in the middle is considered of hybrid origin. So you've got North America, Hawaii, you've got a feral population that is constantly interbreeding with Hawaiian ducks. And in New Zealand as well, you've got gray ducks, which is the endemic species, mallard, what we are coining the New Zealand mallard, which was a derivative of the game farm mallard, and then continuous interbreeding with gray ducks being those hybrids in the middle. Right now, I'll showcase a bit on what genetics has played in the role of understanding what's occurring in North America with the mallard. But more so, if we publish this in 2023, communications biology, but effectively the question is, what is the genetic consequence of all these introductions of game farm mallards worldwide? To do so, we sampled, thousands of samples. Many of you on this call provided many of the samples, whether you were in the Mississippi or Atlantic Flyway at the time. So I appreciate all of your help in making this kind of study possible. And the short of it is what we were able to do is delineate that indeed hybridization is occurring. It's at a landscape level. Populations in New Zealand and Hawaii are feral derivatives, so they are birds kind of like a feral pig. And we were able to find epicenters of hybridization in both locations, mostly France being on the European side, and you can see that dissipation as you move away from it, and the Atlantic Flyway being on the North American side, and dissipating as you go east to west. Blowing this up, we can for North America itself, we can find some additional patterns. Again, we have different types of methods to then delineate individuals as, first generation hybrids, second generation hybrids, or back crosses, and so forth. And the thing that's most important to look at is where are those early generation hybrids, because that's your sort of where continued interbreeding is, and it's mostly in the Atlantic Flyway, right where I circle there, and mostly in New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts. And that is where a lot of known releases continue to occur. But when you look at generally, when we look at a hybrid, most of them are hybrid combinations. I can't tell what generation they are. And so, when that is occurring, you essentially have what is known as a hybrid swarm, where you have a higher probability of two hybrids interbreeding than you do a wild in a wild. That prevalence decreases as you go east to west, but they are interesting behavioral, what appear to be behavioral differences, or I hypothesize to be behavioral differences. One being that these locations here, you've got the Dakotas and Nebraska being genetically pure, and then you've got the lower Mississippi alluvial valley and those locations being pure. So the question was, was there a question? Sorry. I'll keep going. Is there sort of link between these locations? The same was true. I hypothesized, is there a link between the Atlantic and the northern part of the Mississippi Flyway? And of course, I had to ask those questions, and with lots of collaborations. This was Brian Davis and our colleagues' papers, where we looked at that lower Mississippi alluvial valley, just looking at the nuclear DNA. Indeed, the majority of it is, less than 10% of the samples that we got were hybrids or identified as hybrids. And this continues to be true with my collaboration with Doug Osborne, as well as Brad Cohen, on some of the telemetry data that we're going to look at. And of course, the beauty of Doug's birds is that then I can ask, where did they go? And they all went to the Dakotas as the genetics suggested. So there appears to be a genetic link between the Dakotas and that area. Obviously, we've sort of known this from band recovery, but the fact that the genetics is so highly associated, there might obviously be underlying genetic underpinnings that explain that link. Obviously, the interesting thing is the ones that went to the Great Lakes, those are all the hybrids. Moving to the Great Lakes region is the exact opposite trend as the lower part of the Mississippi. And that is Ben Lukanen's work that I was able to be a part of. Ben just graduated, so I guess Dr. Lukanen, where, almost 60% of all the samples are hybrids or known hybrids, and Indiana being the worst of them. These were all females that we had with Ben's work, and then a paper that I published with Mike Schumer and others. We were able to get hunter harvested birds out of Ohio, and very similar trends in that ancestry proportion. And so obviously there's this population dynamic that's occurring between the northern part, the Great Lakes region, as well as the southern part of the Mississippi Flyway. So the obvious question I asked Ben to do is just give me a few maps from for each year of the study. These aren't all of them, but these are some of the better traces. And as you can see, all of them have more or less a random walk. There is linkage with the Atlantic Flyway as I had hypothesized, and there appears to be this sort of like weird wall at Tennessee or so, where they don't really like to cross, and if they do get anywhere near, they sort of quickly retreat. So there's this weird situation where there isn't a clean migratory path as you saw for Doug Osborne's birds out of Arkansas. And the more important things that we learned from Ben's work is that genetics was associated with daily movement distance. So this was really beautiful. This like almost perfect linear association as you go from more game farmy things on the left side of the x-axis to more wild on the right. So daily movements, so the proportion of game farm ancestry correlated with distance moved. So the things that have more game farm in them just simply move less. Their distances are shorter and their stopovers are longer. On top of it, feral and everything under 70% wild had 2 times greater selection of urban land cover. And another part that I'm sure some of you have heard from Ben, but I don't have his graphs right now, but that wild mallards were 3.3 times more likely to incubate and complete nesting as compared to a feral or game farm hybrid bird. So that means you've got a 1-to-3 ratio. So you need 3 game farmy feral things to just have as many eggs as one wild bird can have. And hopefully that makes sense to how that could lead to population declines as we're seeing in the Great Lakes regions. So yeah, so what has genetics taught us, right? So we now know that game farm and wild mallards are at species level differences. You know, a black duck and a mallard is 1.5% different. These things are 5 to 10% different. The other part of it is that the genomic diversity is completely different. And the main thing that I wanted to ask is whether at a genome level, so these are full genomes, ask whether inbreeding goes up as you have more game farm in you. Not only did we find that increasing parts of the genome lack diversity as you had more feral or game farmy things, that resulted in decreasing overall genetic diversity, but that inbreeding scaled proportionally with the amount of game farm mallard ancestry. So having a wild counterpart would have a result of a decrease in inbreeding. But the fact is that we're effectively artificially increasing the proportion of the population that is inbred by having these individuals on the landscape. Fertility, there's many different, there's lots of different issues I'm sure Ben talked about, but even his birds, you know, these birds that have less than 70% wild in them, mostly if they did make a nest, they half-assed it and usually just left after about 2 weeks. So there's a lot of nest abandonment, and the eggs that were around there were often not in as a clutch, but rather randomly placed, more chicken-like. We saw the same thing at Forbes Biological Station when we had these birds in captivity, where you could go into a pen and you pretty much know what you're looking at, whether it's a game farm female or wild female, just by the way whether there's a nest or no nest, and whether there's just eggs basically pooped out all over the place. They have decreased survival. This has only really been done in Europe and Sweden, but we're hoping to use some of Ben's work and some future studies to really understand how that survival looks like on the landscape. Ben's work does have a direct correlate showing that these birds have non-wild migratory tendencies. They appear to not be able to move, and if they do move, like I said, it's more of a random movement than it is directional in migration behavior. Their growth rates and body weights are very different. Their physiology has been completely changed. We have some studies continuing to ongo to looking at flight muscle, even to the flight muscles, how that's been changed. These birds are effectively, you took a jumbo jet, you put shorter wings, so you lowered the flight load. You basically have these things have like very significantly less capacity to put on any sort of fat, no matter how much you feed them, and their inability to feed on wild seeds, as I'm about to show you. Their bill morphology, lamella densities, all of these things have been changed in captivity as expected through artificial selection. And just to touch on that, by having known genetic ancestry, we can start parsing out who is who, what is what, and start asking the questions. Are there statistical differences in morphology and behavior and all of these, like we are with Ben's? And as you can see here, we looked at different morphological characters here. What we found is that game farm mallards tended to have shorter and fatter bills. Their wings are actually shorter, but if you look, unlike the bills, where the hybrids basically are this intermediate form between in the bills, the wings are effectively exactly the same as wild for hybrids. That means Mother Nature, that is the first thing that Mother Nature tries to get rid of, is that. The other fun fact is they typically have longer legs. You can really see the hybrids having that nice intermediate aspect. But when you see longer legs, the only times I really only see longer legs, evolutionary speaking, is when a bird gets to an island and becomes flightless. They become more running, in that case. But the cool thing is that we essentially have better than 90% assignment through various different analyses. Here's a DFA for kind of capturing the variation amongst these morphological traits. We have more than what I just showed you, and you can actually parse out true game farm and wilds very well apart, and we can get up to about 60% game farmy. So kind of get into those F1 highly backcross game farm stuff. And I think if we can develop a key through a phone application like we're working right now towards, or something else, we can put together something that band crews and others can start to identify these things to what they really are, not just, hey, it's a mallard. Talking about that bill morphology, like I said, Susanna Hellegren, I think this just got accepted, but effectively that bill morphology results in, if we force them to feed on wild seeds, it's a 50% decrease in their efficiency and the ability to get those seeds into their gut, and thus those calories in, and game farm females are the worst at over 70% decrease in their efficiency to do so. Hopefully this is it. This is mind-boggling, especially every time I look at all of this, but it really explains why stocking can be forever, because we're putting individuals out that aren't necessarily capable of surviving. And by interbreeding, in this case, we found lots of interbreeding. They are effectively negatively affecting our wild population. So what do we do about this? And we're gonna be moving to Hawaii right now quickly to answer the question of, like, can we even do anything about it? Quick update on Hawaii. Game farm mallards were imported for food and hunting in the 1800s. Commercialization of what we found out to be game farm mallards continued in operations through the 40s. The 60s, Hawaiian ducks were effectively extirpated from all islands except Kauai. 80s saw a captive breeding attempt by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and others, but unfortunately they forgot about all the feral mallards. And by 1999, 1993 on Oahu, and then more recently when we looked at it, by 2000, every population that was attempted through those captive breeding programs failed because they didn't think about the hybrid or the feral mallards that resulted in hybrid swarms on every island, making Hawaiian ducks once again relegated to Kauai alone. My recently graduated student, I guess I should have put Dr. Flor Hernandez. One of her chapters was creating a R program, is a decision-making tool for adaptive management of the native genetic status of wild populations. And our question was, how do we put together traditional methods of understanding population size, reproductive success, survival rates, with thinking about deleterious traits, mortality rates, and DNA? And we wanted to create something that was, that anybody could use, right? Whether you really knew anything about genetics or not, if you could attain some of these population demographic parameters plus a bit of DNA, you can start to model what kind of management strategies you would require. This is just from our 2019 paper, showcasing in yellow is Hawaiian duck, blue and dark blue is basically various forms of feral mallard. And you can see again, Kauai is the only place really that has all yellow. The rest of them are various mixes of blues and yellows. Again, showing that hybrid swarm resulting hybrid swarm because of those feral mallards there. So that decision-making tool, right? We want to optimize specific management strategies, and those management strategies revolve around supplementation, removal, or the combination of both. We wanted to make it an adaptive way where managers will be able to use each generation's empirical data to determine the accuracy of simulations, right? You get the ancestry of the following. So you do something, you get the ancestry of the kids and ask the question, were our models correct, yes or no? And then you can effectively use the difference in what occurred to ask the question, are any of our parameters incorrectly estimated? So again, empirical data can be used to re-optimize models each generation, and that empirical data can help determine which, if any, ecological variables require reevaluations. Some of those, those ecological parameters revolved around life history models. This is a general life history model, but it essentially, you could use this on bear or wolf or really any other bird that has information of this sort, and you wanted to ask a question of what the two kinds of questions is, what do we need to do to reverse hybridization, negative effects of hybridization, or how many individuals do we need to move to increase genetic diversity if that's a lack of? So things like carrying capacity of the landscape, breeding risk to females, risk to males, reproductive success, number, and so forth, and so various types of ecological factors can be fine-tuned to the system. The genetic model, you have these two types of models. You have a point model where it's simply a point ancestry, an average ancestry, or this junction model, more complicated but very similar results are integrated into there. We have two types of models, a static and adaptive. The static simply asks the question, I have 100 individuals, I've got 5 generations to do of money to do this thing. Is it going to work? Me putting those resources onto the landscapes if my population's 80% wild, and so forth. And so you would run it, and the answer would be yes, you can. It would take 70 individuals and 20 generations for every generation to change that genetic ancestry of this population. The adaptive one is a little bit more interesting because you could say, okay, well, 78 sounds pretty good, but you can start playing around. How many individuals do I have to do per generation to re-optimize the end results? And essentially, what it would give you is something like this, where we're forcing it 20 generations, but you can see here it's about 6 generations or so of various input and supplementation and removal efforts that you could actually move that genetic ancestry to your focal species. And we published this already, and what we found is that supplementation alone doesn't do anything, right? Supplementation works, but it requires lots of individuals. Removal doesn't do anything, right? If you've got a bunch of hybrids, all you're going to do is continue to make hybrids. That ancestry doesn't change. But the best situation is if you can supplement and remove at some sort of amounts. And if you look at some of these numbers, if you go to the adaptive optimization, you actually really decrease the total number of individuals that you are required to actually move the needle in your population. And so the optimal strategy is all about what you can do, what resources you have, how many generations you can do this for, what kind, everything from social science, required information of social science, so how much are people going to be okay with this and so forth, you would use that information to ask, what can we really do? The key unit, my team just started there, so we're actually going to be attempting these models right now. So we're going to actually ask the question, these are models. Do they actually work on the landscape? If they have to work on the landscape, then this has the potential to transform the way, hybrid populations are viewed, populations that have low or low amounts of genetic connectivity and suffer from inbreeding and so forth. So this has a direct link to potentially what we can do here in North America if it works in Hawaii. So wish us luck. One thing I did want to also say is we looked at variance in different parameters. One of the interesting things is, what do you want to use? A bunch of males, a bunch of females, combination of the two. And what you want to use depends on the management goal. If you want to increase population size and change ancestry, you'd add an even sex ratio of both males and females. If you just want to change ancestry alone, adding males is the most efficient way of doing it. And that is because less individuals are required to be added into a population when using more males than females. And this has to do with the fact that females are generational contributors. And so if you've got a hybrid that makes, if you make a hybrid, then that female makes more hybrids, and then you need more individuals to outweigh that. Plus, with more females, population size grows. But with males, it either declines or stays stagnant, and so you can change that ancestry quicker. So with that study, we demonstrate that we can actually, in theory, reverse the genetic native status of populations. We're attempting it right now with Hawaiian ducks. The Sim Restore program offers biologists and managers the decision-making tool to optimize species or population management and adaptive framework. We both have the R script that you can do whatever you want, but also we have an app online, a shiny app. You can find it, Sim Restore, that you basically can just change parameters right there, and it'll do all the optimization in front of your eyes. Last story. Quick story is Mexican ducks and model ducks, where how genetics has informed management practices of these two guys. We just published this in Genes. It's called Human-Induced Range Expansion, result in recent hybrid zone between Mexican ducks and model ducks. So if you don't know this, model ducks are Gulf Coast species. In this case, we're working with the Western Gulf Coast subspecies, the model duck. So that ranges from Louisiana all through Texas coastlines. And then the Mexican duck is more interior, but continuing to expand. And what prompted this question is that model ducks along the coast, along the Texas coast, has been declining quite a lot. But early surveys into the South Texas brush country has shown an increase in ducks. So the question is, are birds moving from the coast? Is it a range shift? Is it a population decline? These types of questions. When we looked at eBird data, we can see that people are saying that there are brown ducks into these areas. But again, these are brown looking ducks, and not a lot of people are very good at telling these birds apart. And so that's why they're called dusky ducks. So TPWD wanted to know, what kind of dusky ducks are these? Quick into it, that we were able to find that indeed not only are model ducks moving, so orange is model ducks, purple is Mexican ducks, yellow as well as pink are various hybrids of the two. And you can see this nice little zone of contact. Not only are model ducks moving in, but this zone of contact between Mexican ducks and model ducks in this brush country. When we zoom in on it, you can see that red line and gray line delineate this sort of brand new hybrid zone. But again, east of that line, you have a high probability of counting model ducks. And so this is now going to be integrated into planned population surveys. But yeah, so we have this contact zone. And of course, the question is like, why are these birds moving into this area? Model ducks, maybe the coast is actually getting worse. Well, it is getting worse. So they're moving into there, but how are they moving in there and why are they working? I got a chance to spend some time out there, and it became very evident that ranching for wildlife is also ranching for waterfowl. There are stock tanks, there's corn feeders, nobody's shooting them. They're shooting all the predators, and more or less it becomes duck heaven out there. And there are plenty of locations. Now we've got geotagged birds through Texas Parks and Wildlife. And so we're able to track them, and they're using spots that we can't even see, these little tiny ponds that folks have put out there for their, big bucks and so forth. And so, yeah, so we found that indeed those model ducks are shifting ranges over. And this is now being implemented in a survey that is resulting in counting birds in these east of that red line. And so, whereas there could be population, what appears to be a population decline may in fact be a shift. This has obvious management implications in the fact that you're finding new birds, but how do you manage it if one location is increasing and the other one isn't? You know, that's up to those that make those kinds of decisions, I guess. Finally, this is all crescendoing into this idea called duck DNA. If you haven't heard of it, it's a new partnership between myself as well as DU. And so basically what we're doing is we designed a kit. DU designed a nice little app. You can apply for various amounts of these kits, and you get to become a scientist. This is more or less has been shown, or we found an incredible way to engage hunters. We had about 300 kits available through funding. 4,200 applicants, all 49 states except for Hawaii. Over 700 samples submitted back to us, and these are just some of the cool ones. You can see that brewer's duck where we were able to actually figure out it was a hybrid male, 54% Gadwall, 46% wild mallard. So it's an F1 hybrid. The female was a Gadwall because the mitochondrial lineage was Gadwall, and so it was a male wild mallard with a female Gadwall that made that duck. So we're starting to we can start to ask these kinds of questions at a national level. The other cool thing is that that white looking duck next to that black duck was actually 100% pure black duck. So it's the first genetically confirmed female black duck showing that kind of plumage, which is super cool. We are moving towards that 24, 25 second year, so that was our pilot year. We're hoping for 700 participants, 2,000 samples. More or less, hunter scientists are our fall technicians. We can effectively use this not only to engage the public and have them, interested in it, but they are a source to monitor populations of interest at any sort of level. So I'm sure Mike's going to talk to you more about this, but there's potential to partner with states if there's, you want to engage your specific cohort of hunters. You can get a whole bunch of kits, and you could do raffles or do whatever you want to do with them and ask questions at various scales. Having these folks out there, I have to note that we had many emails that came in and said, my kid didn't want to hunt unless they could do duck DNA. So it looks like it's a great way to engage also youth hunters as well. Lots of folks to acknowledge, many, many studies. Many of you on this call, I acknowledge here, and I thank you for all your help with all the sampling today, tomorrow, and into the future. And obviously all the hunters who have helped collect today and in the future as well. My current students and various students from the past, as well as all the funding that made all these sorts of studies possible and continue to do so. And I hope from this little chat that everybody takes away that genetics isn't some evil box, but it gives conservation a more fundamental foundation to work from, right? So you actually know what you've got in your hand. And so when that band crew's out there, it's less so of squinting and saying, I think it's a hybrid, to being like, oh yeah, these traits are actually say hybrid, and we can start moving population management a little bit further forward. So with that, thank you all for listening. Thank you for having me. I'll take any questions if we've got any time.
Thank you, Phil. That was just the background that we were hoping for. When Mike initially reached out for feedback on duck DNA, I kind of struggled with what the implications might be. And I think you just gave us a range of potential implications. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Questions for Phil? Well, folks are thinking, I'll jump in with one, Phil.
Yeah,
I was thinking about mallards and the game farm mallard to a wild mallard. To most of the hunters we deal with, a greenhead is a greenhead. How would you rate an analogy of a wild mallard is a wild wolf, and a game farm mallard would be a domestic dog?
A husky.
A husky? Okay. I think
Yeah,
that's
so in
super
my
helpful.
mind, it's like if we wanted to do wolf reintroductions, but we use huskies. That's what it's like. Oh, it kind of looks like a wolf.
Yeah, but they're not going anywhere and they're begging for food.
Yeah, but they'll be right back in your doorstep soon enough.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and I will state that through the Duck DNA program and obviously the outreach I try to do, it's been the folks in the Mississippi are the ones that are most like blown away, like why is this even happening and what can we do about it? So I will say the constituents are pretty become pretty, arms in the air, being like, what the heck, why is this happening, kind of thing. So I think there's a lot there that you can get folks excited about and why they want to participate. And that was one of the reasons that we had such high participation for Duck DNA, or hope for the participation for Duck DNA, because not only were they curious about all of those the situation dealing with their mallard, but honestly, they were just simply curious. I mean, waterfowl hunters are the like craziest, right? And I am one of them. So they're all about, just like a band return. Where'd that bird come from? These guys are like, did we call it right? What is this thing? All of that. And I definitely, what I've learned is that a lot of people have an issue with black ducks that they always think it's like a female mallard, like a high proportion of them. So I'm learning, we're learning different things, and maybe there's ways to better tailor that, folks learning about how do you really identify a black duck or not. And I think through Duck DNA, there's a way to have that kind of silent conversation, because you're they're getting that kind of feedback to themselves when they're submitting their samples. And I think it'll be, hopefully will continue for years to come, and that data set could be built to a point where we're starting to ask questions about genetic underpinnings of migration timing, land use, habitat use. If there's chances of hybrids being in certain areas and other areas, does that correlate with mallard populations? As you get higher mallard populations, you get more hybrids or something like that. Hopefully we'll start to get some of those very interesting questions in my book.
I can see where there'd be a lot of excitement on the hunter's end. And those were two fascinating examples you provided. Other questions for Phil?
Hey Phil, the sim restore stuff is interesting, and you gave an example in Hawaii where I don't think they migrate very far, and they're very small population size, and some of the numbers were hundreds of individuals. Do you see that tool being applicable or useful at a state or a Great Lakes region scale to evaluate whether you can make a difference genetically with game farm mallards with removal or replacement?
Yep. Yeah. So I actually, somebody asked me about that, and I did it for the Atlantic flyway, assuming 500,000 bird population. And I was just like super coarse. I didn't really like fine tune any of the ecological parameters, just asking like, can it happen? And apparently it can, right? It would require, and it was less than I thought. It was 64,000 mallards for 5 years, and you can move that whole population back to wild. There's a lot of nuance there. You're right. Does it, like, these are migratory birds. Well, some of them are migratory birds. How does that work? I think there would be a lot of questions that need to be answered before we start to implement them. And the first one would be, in the most confined location where we control basically everything, can we even do it? So hopefully Hawaii proves to be positive. And if that's the case, then I think that there is a possibility with a partner. It would require likely breeder partnerships to facilitate getting effectively a captive breeding program where we are pumping birds out most likely in May to increase the chances of secondary mating. I don't think you'd want to pump them out in February. It would be all about secondary mating, which will also require additional updates to the models, because that is an interesting facet of that. Hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, it sounds like you've thought about it for a while, so I was curious if that was an application you were thinking of. And I mean, just on the state level, even trying to figure out how to turn the tap off is a challenging question for game farm mallards. So even to think how you would go about restoring, I haven't even started to think about something like that.
Yeah, that's actually the first thing that would be required, is that sit down and effectively the question would be you either right. So their input would basically outweigh our input or our efforts.
Yeah.
So it'd be for nothing. It'd be basically doing what Hawaii did in the 80s. And so that's why I say it would require a partnership with breeders. I understand the politics behind it. I understand all of the nuances behind it, the financial part of it. But there is a possibility with all of the tools that we've developed where we can change out their flock to essentially wild, monitor every 3 years their inbreeding coefficient and genetic ancestry, make sure they're not inadvertently changing them due to them being in a cage. And so more or less we could revitalize those birds and do what we need to do, which is essentially start putting these other types of birds onto the wild birds onto the landscape to help move the genetic ancestry back towards wild. That hopefully I've showcased has implications on various biological levels.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for the explanation.
Yeah.
We have time for one last question for Phil. Anybody? Jump in. Okay. Well, hearing none, we're going to hear from Mike Brazier at our flyway meeting about duck DNA. But Phil, I do want to thank you. This was really a great background. I really appreciate your engagement with us on this issue, and I hope we can engage again in the future, particularly on the mallard issue. I think some of the questions Mike asked are on all of our minds as we're kind of ground zero here in the Mississippi Flyway.
No, absolutely. I'm always happy to chat and always happy to work with everybody. So again, thanks for letting me showcase some of the stuff that we've got going and what hopefully genetics can do for everyone. And yeah, again, thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the meeting, and I'm sure I'll see everybody online or somewhere else in the future.
Thanks, Phil.
All right, thanks, Oren.
Okay, agenda number 4, Brett Leach and Pam Garrettson, the wood duck banding needs assessment.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Or let me share my screen here. All right, are you guys all seeing the recommendation?
Yep, we can see the word doc, Brett.
All right, good. All right, yeah, so, and I guess, Pam, feel free to jump in whenever you feel like it as well. But over the last, I guess, several meetings, we've had a couple presentations from Cole and Andy, all regarding the update duck banding goals. And I guess I just wanted to be able to introduce a proposed recommendation and to be able to adopt the work that they've been working on the last several years. And I guess previously the goals haven't been achievable for all the states, and some have struggled with the adult females. But I think I'll be working with the Wood Duck Committee, so we'll go through this recommendation, but so I wouldn't really worry about like the wording or anything like that quite yet. But the idea is to hopefully have a recommendation come out of the August meeting. Let's see, and yeah, really today I just wanted to get a sense of how feasible some of these goals are for all the states. I've heard from a couple states so far, going both ways, where they're saying that they won't be able to do that many, and other states saying that they may have some room to do more banding as well. So I guess just for those that aren't as familiar with the work, so this report, I guess it just differs from and improves upon previous guidance on wood duck banding goals, in that the banding regions, they're reevaluated at multiple scales and ended up recommending the latitudinal regions. And secondly, banding goals are stepped down to the state level based on a combination of the wood duck breeding bird survey index for the state and the area of suitable wood duck habitat within the state. And they ended up finding that many of the, or I guess you could end up banding at fewer sites with larger concentrations. And just to be, let's see. Yeah, and I guess just banding at the fewer sites with larger concentrations, you're still going to have sufficient representation like throughout the state and banding region as a whole. And lastly, the wood duck banding goals, they're adjusted to account for historic banding of adult females, and then they're able to scale those upward and just end up having like an overall goal instead of the age sex specific cohorts. So adopting the recommendations, it'll help ensure that the wood duck bandings are biologically representative in sufficient numbers to meet precision goals for survival and other vital rates, and done in a manner that's logistically feasible and efficient. So the recommendations that ended up coming out of the report, I think everybody on this call should have received that by now. But the banding data, it should be summarized and reported by the latitudinal regions. And I'll show you guys shortly what those regions look like. And then banding goals, they should also be based on achieving sufficient band deployments for adult females with a single objective designed to reach precision levels for all cohorts. And I mean, they recognize that no step down method is perfect, and there is uncertainty regarding the breeding bird survey index and using the National Wetland Inventory for forested wetlands as well. So state specific goals, they're able, I mean, you're able to shift them around. So at least like within that latitudinal region. So for example, I know Minnesota, they've got a good portion of all the banding deployments for their state. So they could shift it to Iowa, and Iowa, I mean, they've got a pretty slim number of bandings according to this report, where there could be more capacity to increase bandings in that particular state. And banding efforts, they can be consolidated to a few of the most productive stations and just cooperatively staffed. And then I guess they ended up leaving it where there's some flexibility. They didn't want to try to tell us exactly like how to do everything. But so they wanted the states to be able to establish like our own within state step down plan. But they wanted to also have it where we're working cooperatively with other partners as well, just to have some buy-in and collaboration. And then lastly, just making sure that all states have a wood duck banding goal, and they end up using 50 as a minimum goal throughout the report. Let's see. So yeah, like I said before, obviously Minnesota, the total is pretty high, and I've had a couple people from Minnesota reach out so far, and they basically said that that is not going to be achievable. I don't think anybody from Minnesota is on the call today. But yeah, and then I mean, I talked with Oren a little bit this morning, and he said that they've got a capacity to do more. Yeah, I'll pull up the latitudinal map just since it's a little bit easier to look at. And they ended up breaking it up where it was 75% apportioned to the state and 25% to the feds. But I mean, like I said, there's that flexibility in however we want to divvy things up. Let's see. Yeah, I think this one's a little bit easier to look at for the banding totals. And really, I just want to hear from you guys on what do you think's feasible for your state? Is there room for more capacity or not? And I mean, we can work with the Atlantic Flyway and see what's possible for them as well.
Hey Brett, can you remind us, this is all wood ducks banded. For example, based on this map in the state of Iowa, if we banded 75 wood ducks, no matter age or sex, we would have met our quota?
Yeah, that's correct. This is all cohorts.
Okay, thank you.
Hey Brett, Wisconsin's quota right now is 1,700. That's what we do as a state already. So we currently are hitting what that number is for us. We may have some capacity to add some, but in some years we're getting that, and some years we're not. So I mean, we're pretty close to right at where we're at.
All right. Yeah, I was flipping through a bunch of the states in the Southeast since I've got a lot of those numbers. And I mean, some states they're right there, and then others, it seemed like the quotas are maybe slightly high.
Hey, this is Pam. Can I just interject with a few things
Yeah.
here? So I would say the two main things that are different here are that Cole went ahead and reevaluated the banding regions, and honestly, it doesn't come out much different than previous things, except for that we're sort of being more intentional about saying, like, really the biological differences are latitudinal rather than longitudinal, which is kind of inconvenient because we manage by flyways. I think Heath also had in mind, this was kind of his baby. He's the person who got both Andy and Cole on board as DFPs, and both I want to just say real quick that I have had a wonderful experience working with both of these young men, and this was really good because Cole went back and reevaluated all these regions, and I probably would have just kept on going with the Kelly regions, but it's nothing new. It wasn't a surprise to me that he didn't find these longitudinal differences. I think Heath was hoping that, hey, this is going to like be a way to give the Atlantic Flyway Southeast in particular a kick in the ass and try to get them to band more. But really, it's really latitude, not longitude, that matters. And then with the step down goals, changing how we did that. So I talked a lot with Mark Siemens about how to do this. To me, it looks, when I look back at the Kelly report, he ended up just dividing everything equally among whatever scale that he was looking at. And so particularly in the Atlantic Flyway, that ended up giving like unrealistically high goals to particularly some of those smaller states, and also like say maybe West Virginia. Like, so you see, like when you do it by habitat and by it's very similar to what I found a couple years ago too, right? So we're using that method for stepping the goals down, and so I think that's actually going to provide a lot of incentive for folks in those smaller and less important states with less wood duck habitat. And I think based on what I heard from Mike Peters from West Virginia, he's like, oh heck yeah, like and it's biologically meaningful too. If every one of those small states got 50, they'd be more than contributing their share of wood ducks as measured by their BBS indices and combined with the amount of forested wetlands in that state. So what happens with Minnesota here is that they've got an awful lot of area, but that's not the only thing that comes into play, because I'm pretty sure they have a ton of wood duck habitat, as does Louisiana, but they've only got so many biologists who can band. And so I think that's what Heath added that piece about, like, the flyway should talk about, like, and the state should talk about, well, can we shift these goals around a little bit? And within these latitudinal gradient areas, we can shift these things around and cover everything adequately. But these goals that have come out of the models and the step down method are I guess a starting point. Does that make sense? Because I know for a fact that like Quebec is like banning way more than like 156. Mostly along the St. Lawrence River, I believe. In fact, I think a lot of that northeastern area, or that sort of northeastern area in terms of the Kelly banding regions, like a third of that currently comes from like the Canadian provinces. We don't want to tell people to ban less, right? So that's all I really have. I think, unless you guys have other questions for me. Actually, I lied. One more thing though is, I wonder if it might be more palatable to people to show these goals without inflating them to try to say like we're absolutely going to be able to get adult females. We inflated what came out of the model, in order to say, in order to give overall banding goals, which I think, based on like the psychology of a person who's at a particular banding station, I know from experience that some years, at least for mallards and blue-winged teal and so forth, we'd get nothing but, some of these stations you'd get nothing but like immature males, and some you would get like all these adult males. So in some stations you're just not going to get, or some areas you may not be able to make your quota, but like you divide the quota up into among your stations. Overall, based on the inflated sort of total, if you ban this many, on average, you ought to be able to get enough adult females. It may not be possible to ever, we may never really get adequate numbers of adult females to measure them, to measure their vital rates with precision at very small scales. So just that comes into play in terms of putting that out there as well.
Thanks for adding that, Pam, because that was one of the questions I had. If the harvest strategy is based on adult males, but yet the banding quotas seem to be based on adult females, is that correct? And if so, can you talk about the discrepancy there?
So it's not that they're based on adult or any of the cohorts per se. Like, so basically what he did was take what came out of the model, and that was the sort of baseline quota, and then we inflated it by, like, let's say, like, on average we're like 20% below the quota on adult females. You're inflating your overall goals by like 20% in hopes that if you go for this higher overall quota, that you'll hit your goals for adult females. But the whole reason that we didn't, or not the whole reason, but there was a lot of discussion on when I did this work back in 2007 was, should we, because I came up with harvest potential based on adult females or adult males. They could have been, you could have like used either one of these two as the cohorts for monitoring. And so even though I think we have more biological concern about adult females, we just can't get our hands on enough of them. And so everybody except for Diane Eggeman ended up voting for let's use adult males as the cohort to monitor, because those precision, those vital rates, precision on them is going to be tighter. It just, and we were already doing the same thing with midkind and mallards, and a whole host of other things too. So it just may be where the ideal thing biologically kind of bumps up against what's feasible logistically.
Is there any evidence that suggests we need to move away from using adult males as the monitoring cohort?
I don't think I'm recommending that. I'm just recommending that I think you'd like to get your hands on enough adult females just for stewardship, right? General stewardship purposes. But no, I'm not recommending that we change that. That would take a lot of discussion. But I think this idea came from the work that he did with Western Gulf Coast model ducks, and this idea that, hey, we're going to try to do things. So it comes from the fact that these things are harder to get your hands on, but then it's also sort of this, I think it's easier for people to get their heads around an overall quota or banding goal for a particular region than it is to say, we've got to get 50 adult females and we got to get 150 adult males. And life just doesn't always work out that way. So I think this inflation factor was put in there to try to both simplify the goals and maybe increase the probability that we would actually hit the quota for adult females, which you guys at the flyway level, you're meeting that. You are meeting it already for adult females. The Atlantic flyway is not. So it may be that you guys end up like saying, hey, we're going to go with recommendation X, and X. We're going to like adopt this as a general guidance, but we're going to ignore their recommendations for X, Y, and Z. We'll take A, B, and C, and we'll reject X, Y, and Z because we don't think it's realistic. You know, and it's unfortunate. I don't think Heath is on this call, but I think he probably would have been if he weren't sick. But so yeah. And hopefully this can help provide some guidance about being more intentional and saying, yeah, maybe we have like so many more wood ducks in Minnesota than we do in Iowa, but the fact is that maybe people in Iowa can get their hands on a whole bunch more and sort of take some of that quote unquote burden off of Minnesota. The other thing that I don't think we've been able to provide, because I just dug up the Kelly document yesterday and sent it to Brett last night, but Dave recommended that we show what the goals were before, like what that came out of that Kelly document, and what they are now, and sort of give a before and after that your council folks can look at, because Dave doesn't think that they're going to be into like looking at a lot of the detail that we provided in this recommendation.
I agree with that. I think that would be helpful, especially for a state like Louisiana. It appears our quote has gone up pretty considerably. But also, I think, knowing that these are the inflated goals, it would be good to have, say either an adult female or an adult male number or quota in the back pocket, so that if we can track that and meet that as a minimum standard, that we can shut down, considering considering the goal is so much higher than it has been in past years.
Right. For some states it is, and for some states it's a lot lower. Part of that is reflecting for the northern states, you've got higher harvest rates of those birds because they're getting shot more. So that brings the necessary number of bandings down. So the thing that affects the precision on the survival and harvest probabilities are, okay, so you get more bandings, that lowers the precision, but also if you get more recoveries, that lowers the precision. So you have this, in a way, this is a little bit perverse, because southern females are getting shot a whole heck of a lot less than northern females, right? And yet that the way we did this, the banding, and I really can't think of an alternative way of doing it, but because they're getting shot a whole lot less and their survival rate's a bit higher than the northern birds, then you need more bandings in order to get the same level of precision, because you're not shooting as many of them. And so I would argue that maybe your biological concern is a whole lot less for southern adult females than it is for northern adult females. So to some extent, yeah, this is a little bit perverse, maybe.
Hey, Brett, are you looking for feedback now on, I guess, our opinion of the quotas, or when do you want that?
I mean, if you have something now that I can jot that down, or just between now and the August meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I can keep
Yeah,
track of all that.
ours went way down, so we can do more, I guess, if that's needed. Pam, what's your thought? I know the recommendation said talking with the Atlantic Flyway too, but I'd hate to go to direction with my staff and say, hey, you guys can cut your wood duck banding effort, by 80%, and then North Carolina can't get what they're
Yeah, I agree. No,
assigned. So
I absolutely agree. Yeah. And so what my thought was is I was gonna I haven't sent this to Molly Neese, who's the yet. But my thought was gonna send this recommendation to Molly Neese and say, this is what the Atlantic Flyway's been pondering over. And are you guys interested in sort of maybe some talks about how to potentially adjust these things within these latitudinal regions in order to properly cover the bases in a way that makes logistical sense. And yeah, because I know like Pennsylvania's, I mean, yeah, I don't want people to like, yeah, I don't want this to be used like in a way that would say, oh yeah, you've already got enough from Ohio that you'll just like, yeah, reduce it down.
Mm-hmm.
This is coming out of like just different ways of stepping the banding goals down. And I mean, I went back and forth among a lot of different things, and I know that North Carolina is, when we discussed things last summer, Doug Howe was like, yeah, we can do thousands, and so, but I'm not sure for 44,000. And I think maybe we should provide the uninflated numbers too. I don't think we're looking for we're not looking for any kind of decision, but I think we are looking maybe for feedback. Is that fair to say, Brett?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And then I think if we're gonna end up talking about the Atlantic Flyway as well, it'd be good if everybody just kind of has a general understanding of what their state is doing between the state and the National Wildlife Refuge. And then that way, I mean, if we have to divvy things up at all, I mean, we already have all the information pulled together prior before any recommendation goes out.
And there's a little, yeah, none of this is like the statement he's put in, that none of this is perfect. Like if you look, like Rhode Island is 0. The reason they're 0 is because they do not have any BBS routes in the state. So there's no data. There's no data on like they don't have a BBS index for wood ducks for that state specifically, or any breeding bird. So I know you guys are running short on time here. How about if I like forward this along to Molly and copy Brett on it, and sort of reach out to them and say, this is kind of how the discussion went, or and would you guys consider this, and would you consider specifically talking about ways to potentially shift bandings between states that have maybe less capacity, or would be overwhelmed by cannot realistically meet these goals, but where it could be potentially taken up by other states. Does that seem like a fair thing to do?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Just so that way we're all on the same page and have an understanding of what they might be able to do compared to us as well.
Yeah. I don't, this won't surprise them because it's not that far off from the things that I presented at their meeting last summer. So, and then, you know, and I know Heath is pushing hard for a recommendation to adopt these. But if you guys aren't there, you weren't there.
I think we need more coordination both within regions of between states and then between flyways.
Okay.
And it's fine with me if that's going to take considerable time. We might not have a final recommendation on this until the winter, and that would be fine with me. I think this is a great effort. I think there's been a lot of work gone into getting us here. That's been really excellent. But I think we just need some more internal and external communication and coordination to get us to a place where we feel comfortable setting these goals and quotas.
Well, I'm happy to take the lead on that, and I'll just start by reaching out to Molly and copying Brett on it, and putting this out there, and go from there. Thank you guys for your time. Brett, do you have anything else?
I don't think so. I think the biggest thing would just, like when I was talking in Minnesota, they weren't really quite sure like what the National Wildlife Refuge System was doing. And they just kept emphasizing how that goal that they had is not anywhere near achievable for their capacity right now.
Yep. Yep, I understand.
So I think if people can just check with like the National Wildlife Refuge and see what they're doing. I've got all the information for the Southeast since Heath had been compiling that for many years. But just that way we have that information once we need it.
So in other words, trying to figure out where what kind of wildlife refuge banning has been going on specifically in Minnesota or all the upper Midwest or all the Mississippi flyway states.
Yeah, so I mean I've got it for the Southeast, so it would just basically be Missouri North is what we would end up needing.
Okay. I could probably pull that up and just go by permit and split it out that way and then try to compile it. Because I have code written to do that, so that could easily be modified to do that. So I can get on that too.
All right. But yeah, otherwise I would just echo what Warren said and just a little bit more communication with the Atlantic Flyway and then go from there.
Yep, sounds good. I appreciate your guys' time on this, and
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, Pam. Thank you, Brett. Let's keep moving on to item number 5, possibility of restricted seasons. John Brundy.
And we don't really have to spend much time on this, but I was just curious, you know, as I'm sitting here thinking about timelines and how things work. We found out on August 20th, you know, based on the numbers in North Dakota, they were down, mallard numbers were down. We're certainly sort of within striking distance of some kind of season restrictions. And so I was curious, I know some states have it built into their regulations that, hey, under this restricted package, that here's what our seasons will be. But for a state like us, we don't have that in our regs, and it hasn't been thought about since the 90s. And has anybody else started a process to consider how you might utilize something less than 60 days, 30 days or 45 days or whatever?
That was a question to our fellow tech reps.
Well, for us in Arkansas, we really haven't thought a whole lot about it yet. We're pretty much just waiting for the report to come out and then go from there. Just because with the timeline that we're working off of, I mean, we're going to have plenty of time to get anything passed by the time season selections would be due.
For me, I've got basically from when our commission passes it, it takes 9 months to get through the legislature. So we're going to find this number out on August 20th, and I'm going to have a commission meeting I'm going to have to make a recommendation on August 30th. So I'm completely upside down as I start thinking about that. So, because we can't wait till our next commission meeting to do that. So, just curious if anybody else had a plan in place for how you. It's so daunting to ask. Where are the 30 days? Where do you put the 30 days? And thank goodness, all you states with zones, I will at least only have to do it once. If you got a bunch of zones, man, wow, that'd be really hard.
Yeah, JB, I guess our process was exactly how you started your conversation. Was we just went ahead and made things in our administrative code for if we were to have a 30 or 45 day. We kind of been, ramping that effort up, and we got it in last year. So now, and we're going to be setting our seasons for 5 years, and we have those as packages moving forward. So maybe if it is something that's within striking distance for, the next few years, it might be a worthwhile effort.
Jamie, what you doing in Tennessee? Have you thought about it yet?
Well, I was just going to say I don't envy you at all. Our process is way simpler because we don't have to go through legislative process and all that. It's just an approval of seasons by the commission, and as long as whatever the federal frameworks put out, I mean, that's we don't have any problem adjusting days. And if we were to adjust days, they're all going to be backloaded. It's all going to be December, January. So yeah.
For us right now, we have 4 days of Thanksgiving, and then we count 56 days back from January 31st. But if you do that for us in the future, you put all the days in January. Well, our highest harvest days are all in December. So do we get rid of the hunting in December? Do we these are all, and even if I had till January or February, I don't know, how do you get through the process of, I mean, everybody is going to be all over the board on this. So I was just struggling a little bit to see if anybody else had, fortunately, maybe nobody else has had to start worrying about it yet. Hopefully it won't be a problem, but for me, if it happens, then I've got 10 days.
Your hunters aren't going to be happy either way, John. So it doesn't matter.
That's it. I mean, very true. And I won't be happy.
Yeah, in Alabama, we're pretty much similar to Tennessee. It doesn't have to go through the legislative process. So once they are passed by and approved by the Conservation Advisory Board, then we submit them into regulation. So no issues with Alabama.
So how will you, and Seth, will you query hunters, or are you just going to go, this is when we're going to do it?
I'm already getting questions about why we didn't go to January 31st this past season. So I'm going to start on January 31st and count my 30 days, and they'll be happy. Even though our highest harvest is probably early January, late December.
Yep. I mean, it's we're the exact same way, Seth. If I was to end the season on the 30th. Half the hunters would just howl that we didn't go to 31st and I robbed them of an entire day of hunting. So yeah, we would probably be the same way, even though we would probably end up losing some real good harvest because nobody thought about the fact that you can actually get some decent days in December.
So basically y'all would have an internal discussion then and just do it. That's what we're going to do then.
Yeah, well, I mean, where you only have 10 days, I think that's all you can do. But where we might have a little bit more time, we probably would query the public. But I know we've got like 4 really big duck hunters on our commission, and I know exactly how it would go. We would backload all the days.
Yeah,
they'd all be January and December days.
We know best.
Well, Zach, you got a plan? He's hiding back there. There he is.
Yeah, so yeah, I haven't give 30 days a whole lot of thought. I won't present dates to the commission until January. We'll have 60 days of public comment, and usually, even amongst in controversial years, we get it done in with not too many hiccups. But yeah, as far as setting up dates there, our coastal zone best days are early, mid to early November, and then our east zone wants to hunt as late as possible. So man, setting up. Plus, we've got the splits to deal with too, which will help. But yeah, I've got a potential problem where I've got half the state open while the other half is closed, and then it swaps. Yeah, again, echo the same sentiments. Nobody's going to be happy, but fitting all that in with holidays too is another thing we try to accommodate for the public as well. So
I just can't. It's hard for me to forego all December hunting and just hunt in January. So we'll see. Like you said, nobody's gonna be happy, but just curious if anybody Taylor's ahead of the game, and I think maybe Rachel, you guys in Missouri are also ahead of the game doing the same thing. But it'll if it happens, we'll all be scrambling against something we hadn't seen since the 90s, I guess.
Taylor, if you said so, I missed it. Did you survey based on and get data from hunters on if you had a 30 or 45 or 60-day season?
Yep, we did a public input process where I said hypothetically, if we were under a 30-day season, what would a season structure? And we gave them 3 or 4 options, so we didn't get 2 million different responses. We used our waterfowl advisory committees to try to narrow down those things. And again, no one's experienced it since 96 or 97. So again, it's really hypothetical. I'm sure that the dates are going to be absolutely hated once they get forced into them. But in the next time when we go through a process of setting the seasons for 5 years, we can open that back up and say, okay, now you've had a 30-day season. What would you actually like? So it's just a placeholder until we ever experience it.
And so you gave them a couple alternatives and let them select? And
yep.
Because, we're trying to figure out how to ask the question. I want to get data on it, especially when we reconfigure or if we reconfigure our zones. And we thought asking them by week if they want the season open may be a good way to look at geographic zones too. But
yeah, we went back to what we had because we had our north and our south zone has changed since like the 80s. So we saw what our season structure was back then, and had some at least informed opportunities. And then, like I said, just more or less asked our advisory committee of, okay, push came to shove, what days would you select? And we just gave them a handful of options and then made them pick. It really wasn't that big a deal because most people still don't think that it's coming. So for them, it was a box to check.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep.
We're also not prepared, Brunges, in case you didn't get that out of my questions. So.
It's going to be hang on for dear life when we find out.
Dave will get us
Hey,
through it, right, Dave?
Can I expose my ignorance, guys, and have a question for y'all?
Yes, sir.
I've never really given a whole lot of time or interest into harvest management, but I'm curious, hearing the zone and boundary thing. Theoretically, could Jason propose non-overlapping seasons with our zone structure? Could we run a 30-day coastal season and a 30-day MAV season and effectively still give our hunters a 60-day duck season if you're willing to jump zone boundaries? Would that violate any?
Yes, you can't do that. Your state is allowed so many days. We have that question come up every time for like, hey, why isn't our duck season like the turkey season? So you could choose which, if you're in the north zone, you could choose if you want X amount of days versus and yeah, I've ran that past Dave, and your state is allowed so many days, not, or even your zone's allowed so many days. It's not, a hunter doesn't get that many days to hunt.
Okay.
Is that
Fingers
right,
crossed
Dave?
Yeah, I'm not.
I think what Paul said is legal.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think what Paul said is right.
Yep. Yep. You have 30 days in your zones.
For
Each
your
zone
zone,
can have
yes.
30 days.
Yeah.
They do not have to overlap. You could have a 32 separate 30-day zones that do not overlap and give a total of 60 days in the state.
Sorry,
But
Paul.
it would only be in half
I
the
was
state at the time.
mishearing you. Yep. I was thinking that we have our hunters asking for their 30 days for them to select their own 30 days rather than zone specific. But yeah, you're right.
Just ask my friend Doug north of me. I think they hunt. So I looked, it was like 100 ducks, 106 days in Illinois. So.
Well, I'll chime in, John. So we haven't given too much thought to it, but we also don't have to go through a legislative process either. And a couple years ago, our Natural Resources Advisory Board, which is similar to a commission, was disbanded. So we don't even have that hurdle at this point. So relatively easy process for us that we would just make the decision internally, and then essentially just have the director rubber stamp it at that point as far as season dates. So we've not asked folks what they would want for a 30 or a 45-day season, but we would most likely just go to our aerial survey data and probably go a normal distribution around our peaks on that for the most part.
All right, Oren, that's probably enough of the time for today. I was just curious what folks were thinking.
Great. Yeah, well, hopefully we don't go there, but we're all going to be sitting on the edge of our seats during Dave's status update. All right, agenda number 6, zone and split changes. Is Nate on?
No, Nate asked me to carry this one. And again, this is more just an informational to get the wheels turning here. I will read what Nate put together. He put changes to the zones and splits framework have taken place during 2011 and 2019 open seasons. In 2019, 2 zones and 2 splits were approved by the SRC, but was only adopted by 3 states, Louisiana, Maryland, and North Carolina. Also in 2019, the Central and Pacific passed a recommendation to allow 3 zones and 2 splits, so 9 discrete units. However, this recommendation was not carried by the Mississippi or Atlantic flyways and then was not approved by the SRC. So the Pacific, Central, and Atlantic flyways have expressed interest in this option for 2024. Currently, 5 states exceed that 6 discrete units through their grandfathered zones in Pennsylvania, New York, and Nevada, split flyways, Colorado, or split management units in Kansas. Within the Mississippi Flyway, 8 states currently have at least 3 zones and 4 states use the maximum number of discrete units. These states are all in the mid and northern latitude when migrating timing and weather can make it difficult to set seasons that appease hunters. So additional zones and split options will provide managers with increased flexibility to set seasons. So again, when Nate was asking around, he was looking at the potential 3 zones with 2 splits or 4 zones with 1 split. And I know we discussed 4 zones with 1 split in 2019. I know Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, we were all having that discussion. I believe that was not, there was no interest from folks in the southern half of the flyway, but this is something that Nate from Minnesota, being relatively new on this, was did his homework on and was asking around and is interested in. I know Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan now are definitely interested in having at least additional options moving forward. And again, at this point, I'm not looking for anything. I just want to let folks know that at the flyway meeting, that's likely going to be something that we would like to have at least some time to discuss.
Can I just say no now?
Yeah.
You can all encourage Jason Olzak to do a really good job evaluating what they selected the last time, because that'll be really important to actually have states that pick the new things in the past complete their evaluations before the SRC is likely to have any appetite for considering something new. And I'll leave it at that.
Got homework, Jason.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's the survey we'll do at the end of this coming season. So I'm really hoping I'm not forced into surveying hunters before that too, and kind of just bombarding them, within 6 months of hunter opinion surveys.
Okay.
Yeah, Jason and I talked, and he's not required to do it till the end of that time period.
Okay,
Hey,
like I said,
Taylor?
I don't. Go ahead, Adam.
Just, I guess, a request, and when this thing comes, can you change the language so that it says segments instead of splits, so we know exactly what we're talking about? Because that gets confusing. I know when Nate talked to me on the phone, we had two different ideas of what split meant, and so season segment is a little bit clearer.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, I know we're way over time. So yeah, either way, guys, like I said, just think on it. If you have any interest, I think the mentality from the states that want this is this would provide us more flexibility. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to. And I know that may not necessarily be the appetite. If it's available, hunters are going to want it, even if we don't want to deal with it. But like I said, it just provides additional flexibility in a time where we're trying to recruit more hunters.
Just for a point of order, I'm assuming we will discuss this under joint regs. Is that the appropriate committee for this issue?
Yeah, that's where we'd start, and then if there was a recommendation, it would go to each committee. But yeah, we would definitely, that's where the general discussion would happen.
Okay. I'll put it under joint regs. You got that, Taylor?
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
All right, Adam, I think you're up. Summer 25.
Yeah, I just have a one quick question. The place, we have a couple of places I'm looking at. One of them is up on the Lake Michigan coast, Michigan City, between South Bend and Chicago. The question I have is that the facility is actually a blue chip casino, and I wanted to know if people thought states would have problems sending people to a meeting at a casino. I think the February of 08 meeting was at a casino in Mississippi. I missed that meeting. My kid was being born, but I just wanted to touch base with that. If anybody thinks or knows that their state will have a problem with that as a venue, just let me know. I'm going to try to make initial contacts with the 3 properties I'm looking at before our August meeting, so I can come in with more details. So you can just shoot me a note or a text or an email or whatever, and let me know if you think that that's a problem for your state to send you to a meeting at a casino. That was really it.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Appreciate the planning and communication. Again, if people are going to have problems with this, please let Adam know.
Just how in the name is it the casino prominent in the name?
I think it's Blue Chip Casino and Hotel and Conference Center or something like that.
Okay, I'll have to ask. I don't know. Never run into this before. Hopefully not a problem.
Anybody else for Adam?
Adam, that may be good to know, to John's point, if the facility would know how the billing comes, like what the billing looks like when they send a bill out, how that hits. I don't know if they know that or not, but.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I can bring all that information with me in August. I just thought if anybody knew if they had a red flag or thought it might be a red flag that they could check into it between now and August, that'll help me out. It's a really great spot. It's just like 1,000 feet from Lake Michigan. We could do potential salmon charters, and we have a beach to play wiffle ball on, and there's a lot of food right there. So just a really good spot, but there's no other facility other than the casino.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's move on to this summer's meeting. Item number 8, August meeting prep. I'm going to begin by just giving Doug a chance to fill us in on how the meeting planning is going.
Sure, just a few details, Oren. Big things for folks. The hotel reservation deadline is this Friday. So we're As of last count, we're still a little light on folks. I don't have a list of who specifically has reserved a room yet, but Friday is the deadline. If you're reserving online, make sure you use the group code. If you don't, it won't show any availability for the hotel as of right now. Registration is going to be $250. We're hoping to have that Square link active either this week or early next week for folks to start registering for the meeting. Outside of that, meeting planning is going well, and I can't think of any other details. As far as breakfast will be included in your rate at the hotel. That'll be taken care of that way. It'll be provided in the restaurant every morning starting at 7 o'clock. So does anybody have any questions about the meeting or the event space or anything as of right now? Obviously, the dates are the big thing right now. Make sure folks get their reservations in.
Okay, thank you, Doug. I'm looking forward to it. I just have a few points of business to share with the group in relation to the meeting. I'm going to share my screen with the overview of our committee meetings, etc. It's changed just a little bit. How's this? Is this coming through? Okay, so in terms of a virtual meeting the week before, I got very little feedback on that. And so my preference would be if we don't need it, that we don't have it. As far as I can tell, there isn't a huge demand in terms of virtual presentations during the in-person meeting. So right now, I'm thinking that we will not have a virtual meeting the week prior to our in-person meeting, but I'm still seeking feedback. If anybody feels strongly, speak now or send me an email. I am looking for a couple slots for presentations, specifically for Drew Fowler and Mike Brazier. Drew's going to talk about stable isotopes, so I was kind of hoping he could fit into migration committee. And Brazier is going to talk about duck DNA. So if any of the duck committees, maybe dabbling duck committee, if you would have a slot for him. Otherwise, I can put them in Wednesday, late Wednesday morning, but it's going to cut into our report writing time. So again, committee chairs, etc. I'm seeking feedback on that.
Orin, I sent you an email regarding the Drew Fowler presentation right before this meeting. So yeah, just check it out. I mean, basically it's either A, I have no problem fitting Drew into the migration committee. I got plenty of room for it. But if if you prefer that, then that's okay. We'll go ahead and do that. But if you wanted him in general session, we could leave Drew in general session. I left that one up to you.
I guess if you have time, Jamie, I would probably rather put him in your committee.
Okay, so Drew, if you're still on, your migration committee, Monday, 4 o'clock.
Houston, how about the dabbling duck committee? Might have lost Houston. All right, so I'm going to keep moving on then. I really want to emphasize preparation and communication. Please let me know what your agendas look like and what your anticipated needs are. I understand those might change, but I think that really behooves us to prepare ahead of time, especially with the summer meeting, given the short turnaround time. Please let me know if you have potential recommendations. I'll show you guys what I'm thinking we'll have here now. We've got 3 that I think will probably be complete before we go into the in-person meeting. And then we've got several that I'm monitoring. Please take a moment to review this. And if there's anything that's not on here, please let me know so we can better communicate and prepare for that recommendation. while you all are reviewing the recommendations, I heard from the other flyway chairs in terms of the timing of their meeting. The Pacific Flyway is meeting the week following us, August 26th to 28th, as is the Central Flyway. The Atlantic Flyway is meeting in September, the 9th through the 13th. So we're the first to meet, and then the Pacific Central will meet the following week, and the Atlantic will meet 3 weeks later. All right, so that was what I had on meeting prep. Anybody have any questions on the upcoming meeting?
Oren, I just have a suggestion, I guess. I think that the AHM is going to be super short. So if you want to make us 30 minutes and make diving 90, I think that'll work out fine. I don't want to waste that extra time while we're waiting in between committees there, because all we really have is the priority list, and there's not going to be a hell of a lot of discussion, I don't think. And I know that the diving duck has got 3 or 4 things to talk about.
Okay, Doug, how does that sound to you?
That works for me, Oren. I think we'd be able to use it. So.
All right, thanks for that, Adam. I will make that change. All right, and if any other committee chairs, that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to hear now, sooner than later. I'm going to be traveling the next 3 weeks. I'm going to have to travel home to my parents' farm to put in some sweat equity, and then I'm going to go up to Churchill and hopefully ban some geese with Jillian. So I'm going to be AWOL for the next few weeks here. So get me today or tomorrow, or mid-August is when I return. So, but please, I just emphasize communication ahead of the meeting. I do have one last item to make folks aware of. Derek Ballard called me this morning to let me know that DU is working on a letter regarding the farm bill and the timing of the farm bill. Unfortunately, it's going to fall outside of our meeting cycle, and it will probably need to be passed before our in-person meeting. So if the Habitat Committee Chair and John as Vice Chair, if you would please work with Mike to review the letter and shepherd this through the GBTS and Council, I would appreciate that.
I think I just saw an email from Derek with with something.
Yeah, he just sent it. I haven't looked at it yet, though.
Okay, great.
Hey, Oren. Yeah, I was just gonna talk real quick. Yeah, I heard from our policy folks this morning, and it sounds like it's just a letter for support of basically just passing the farm bill this year. If not, it's gonna be they're thinking late 2025 before anything's gonna happen. I didn't realize they're only giving until the 22nd for support. There's a link, and in my email to you, I already have a letter written there from the DU policy folks. So it's a really, really short turnaround time. I'm not sure it's going to be, I guess, feasible. But
that's 22nd of July, Derek?
Yes. So basically, I think that's Monday. So it's going to be pretty, I don't know if that's going to be possible. Talking to the policy folks, it's mostly, there's a link in that email, and they basically just want to, people to go to that email and sign for support. They were talking about having the flyway and individual states do that.
Well, it would be pretty tough to get it through both the GBTS and Council in that time frame, and I don't know that it's worth the ask unless it was super critical. But that's my initial feedback. How about anybody else?
I mean, you could send the link out and ask states that can get there to do it. But you're right. There's no way you get it through Council by Monday.
Okay, well, maybe I'll do that. I will share what I have gotten from Derek, and that way if people are able to respond to it individually, we can do so. And if we need to address it offline or later on, we can certainly talk about that. Does that work for you, Derek? Okay. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time and out of agenda items. I would just close by asking, is there any other urgent items that we need to consider? Okay, very good. I don't want to hold anyone late. Thank you all for your time and attendance this afternoon.
Thank you, Orin.
Be safe, Orin.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, Orin, have fun. Be safe.